Who's afraid of the letter P? It's been a heavy week. Although I'm not a neuroscience enthusiast in any form, I can imagine my neurons firing their synaptic pulses in a completely different dance than before. Horrors of war are embedded into their electric shocks. The grayed faces of dead children spoil my memory. A Twitter caption positioned right above it. Nevertheless, as I look around my college, libraries, lounges, dining halls, I question why faces of scorn and grief are not littered among the masses. Where are the sagging dark circles and twisted forehead lines? Didn't the sun explode the day before and every day before that? Was I the only one who felt the radiation explode through my skin this morning? Was I the only one whose makeup routine changed that day? Today. Tears have primed my foundation and set the undertones of my concealer. I don't intend to sound like some random girl on the internet who claims how heartbroken she feels about the deplorable state of the world today. In fact, I think it's a silent crime that I must clarify this within my first few utterances of what I must discuss today. In fact, there have been many silent crimes happening all around us, and some may say that this gray cloud that's been looming over me all week has always been there. It's true. I wouldn't dare disagree. The frightening, unsightly images we see emerge from the Middle East today are not isolated consequences of what occurred on October 7th. With a bit of understanding of history, it is more than evident that these subsequent terrors that follow after thousands have been suffocated under the feet of their oppressors on their necks for decades. The torture of spirit, the stain of dehumanization, and the isolation of the soul that we read and hear described by various sources cannot be confined to one random afternoon, as many have claimed. The great cloud that many of us question and cower under in disgust today is a dark sky that thousands of Palestinians have lived under for decades. Millions. Thus, the first instance of the P word that comes about: privilege. After spending countless of hours scrolling through X, it is more than clear how many of us flinch when reality drags us closer to the edge of that abyss. It is a dark void that we cannot dare to inch closer to because as its horizon nears, we become increasingly aware that all of our fears will culminate into the most eerie image of all, our reflection. As Americans, we must recognize the fine line we constantly tread to escape the reality of this P word. It has become so natural in the soles of our feet that our low calluses have developed into new attachments of our personhood. Every waking conversation I have shared with my roommates since last Saturday has been about the genocide happening in Palestine. It is the last thing I follow up with before I head off to sleep. It is the first rummaging thought on my mind when I stir from a somewhat peaceful night of sleep. In fact, as the brown marching band journeyed through the campus streets to welcome parents for family weekend, I instantly thought the clashing cymbals and blaring trumpets were part of a cacophony of triumphant instruments. A military march commemorating our nation's cemented stance on a warpath across the oceans. Nothing I can say will accurately describe the rapid hollowing of my insides for you. But I can figure I can only say that the mind under immense stress and fear is a brain I never want to continue playing with. It is my privilege to protect the peace of my brain by avoiding the atrocious visuals of war and genocide. It is my privilege to stay out of the news. It is my privilege to delete social media when I want to. It is my privilege to stay out of the loop when it is too much. It is my privilege to be afraid of this P word. My roommate briefly mentioned how a Palestinian classmate was trying to finish an assignment in the back of a Students for Justice in Palestine meeting. Their problem set was due the same night Israel demanded the evacuation of thousands of families from their homes to bomb, to get rid of the problem, to punish the terrorists, to teach them a lesson. Stress for a calculus homework grade, or stress about the impending ethnic cleansing of their homeland. This horrifying would you rather is one I never thought would be a choice of actual consequence in the real world. I cannot imagine the emotional rigor one must push against to continue to move through the day and finish their societal obligations to play student without the searing pain, fear, and grief cutting through their chest with every new step elsewhere. After classes finish, I typically sit down in a quiet space and do work. My Google Calendar and my to-do lists have been godsend tools for an academic comeback semester. With my parents' visit approaching at the end of the week, I make sure to finish all of my assignments early so I can get ahead. Yet day after day, all of the precious hours I've secured for myself to mold myself into an academic weapon were spent in an abysmal rabbit hole, consuming all of the media posts and updates I've calculatedly ignored to get through life. Sifting through hundreds of TikToks, tweets, and articles, I spent at least 6 hours on my phone feeling outraged, displaced by insurmountable hopelessness, or merely crying on Wednesday, my free to do everything day. When I eventually picked myself out of the rubble from an obvious social media splurge, I was met with the voice. For the procrastinators reading along, you are uniquely intertwined with such a dominating voice, the one that coos in your ear about how unproductive you've been, the one that fishes into the depths of your stomach and yanks the time anxiety out for you to pack your mounting shame inside. This week, the voice had a different vibrato. It wavered. With all of the different perspectives and news sources I couldn't access through mainstream journals, I had to question whether this social media splurge was one I should regret and avoid in the coming days. Was staying informed and having my heartstrings pulled a factor of unproductivity and a case of being a bad student in a world where tragedy was on the rise? It isn't. It never will be. I just started reading 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. Even though I bought it with the intention of learning how to mitigate my procrastination in time management, I hope, and I hope, and I hope, and I hope its premise is one that prioritizes the human condition and the spirit in the grand fabric of time and the cosmos. Because what are we here for? A calculus grade? Or something far larger than what you nor I can ever expect to understand? I hope this debate never pokes around in my chest again. I'll grant myself the excuse this time, and perhaps only this time. I never really lived during a time when war was broadcasted to the masses in 1080p resolution. Nor have you. Overall, I hope to live this life with the intention that my human soul and the souls of others are prioritized over all other things, because I will never have the chance to live a life where I can learn from the regrets of disregarding the bigger things: fate, destiny, love, hope, faith, liberation. For 3 nights straight, Zionists met on the main green, our campus's focal point, for a vigil to grieve the lives lost in the Hamas attack. The next day, Palestinian liberation supporters met on the same steps. Those same steps, which I attended and shared with my Instagram. I must admit there was the gravity of hesitation in each new step I took outside the realm of social media. Pressing posts to reshare my college's SJP Instagram statement was not just an abstract act of me screaming into the internet void. This was me declaring which side I was on to my peers, my classmates, my friends. By refraining to say the P word spread around the news and Twitter headlines in my normal spaces, there was a new P word to stay away from: Palestine. In this digital world, a single post, even a simple Instagram story, requires diligent calculation involving an account of various social parameters and Gen Z norms. It was a declaration of someone's identity and what you were known for, because in our college's strategically loosely connected social bubble, an Instagram story was, though seemingly trivial, a public announcement to let everyone know what you thought about and did in your free time. Before Brown SJP posted their statement, our youthful bubble on College Hill was untainted by the ugliness of the real world beyond. A curse of silence and ignorance wafted through the autumn breeze. But we knew. We knew there was a destruction in silence, and there would still be destruction even after the silence would be beat out of us. Days leading up to our college's vigil for the Palestinian lives lost and murdered, my roommate and I were discussing the safety precautions Brown's SJP had to enforce for all attendees. It was uncanny, putting up my hair, masking my face, watching them take off essential pieces of their eccentric wardrobe to avoid being recognized in pictures, harassed, doxxed. It is one of the very few moments in my college experience I will forever hold close to my heart, because it was one of those seconds where you remember that indeed, life is fleeting, but its history is permanent. It was all history. Walking from our dorm to the main green felt like I was walking into a coliseum with its stands full of people ready to stone me and my friends. As people gathered and friends put on their masks on their trek there, I couldn't help but recognize the group stalking off in the distance, watching. My memory is permanently stained with my peers' looks. These were my Instagram mutuals and classmates who gifted me jugs of ice cream as a joke just a week ago. Yet today I could almost hear them spewing terrorist supporters and anti-Semitic believers in their gazes. It was only then that I could really feel the clouds graying finally. They haven't left since. Before that Thursday, most of my conversations involving the calls for genocide and revenge by the major political powers were hushed. Although I will admit there is a large Jewish student demographic on campus, I will not recognize nor verify that being Jewish and being a Zionist is the same thing or requires one to be another. This is a fact many people fail to realize, and because of this, my tongue would frequently knot when my insides longed to voice how sick it felt after doing a routine check on Gaza updates. Because of this, my conversations with friends in dining hall lines and dorm rooms would translate into various levels of the taboo board game, switching from easy to hard in the span of seconds to find those who are equally disgusted and horrified by grief. Eyes twist into something unrecognizable. They side glance, they look down, they say things that I never knew I would need to translate at this point in my life or ever. A silent minority. A blaring alarm naturally plays in the back of my head when I say something, hoping for a friend to bite the bone. I throw, I wait, and I sigh, because most of the time they do. It's the litmus test of politics, I usually say when we get to that point in the conversation, where we agree that everything happening beyond our bubble is abhorrent. Over the week, the only win I can take is the fact that most of my friends do not side, validate the claims, or defend those who upkeep the fist of white supremacy through oppression and settler colonialism. It's almost as if those who have witnessed or personally felt the defeat from colonization, imperialism, or marginalization have an invisible string that is linked into the flash of our backs, connecting us in power to see behind the tactics of our shared oppressors. We are united in our pain. The further I develop into an adult woman outside of the bounds of my childhood home, I learn this pain is what gravitates me to my friendships in the outside world as a self-efficient adult. None of my friends are afraid to discuss the other P word because even outside of the historical upturning such as this week, why are we afraid of the word politics? At first, I thought it was the case of being young. Before the age of 14, you couldn't tell me what the GOP stands for. It was adult business and adult business only. The way we silently outgrow our tattered recessed shoes and fix ourselves to buy souls we can actually fit and wear to work is the same subtle cycle I thought everyone else did to leave this understanding that politics was for the others to handle. By our grown college-attending, tax-handling age, I expected my peers to outgrow this youthful distaste for the complex and unknown. Didn't we all know that politics infiltrates every arena of our lives? From the machine we used to like a post to the demographics of our classrooms? Didn't we all know that we serve an obligation to ourselves and our peers to be somewhat informed? As such, I was abysmally proved wrong. However, the blinding awareness did not become apparent through the public reaction from this week's events, where humanitarian crises and evident crimes against humanity beckon pacifists to stay firm in their centrist, harmful rhetoric and proclaim either ignorance and willful negligence. Rather, it was when I tried to gain more attendees and emails for the Women in Politics Club at our semesterly extracurriculars fair. My booth was a ghost town. I wondered to myself if the school's gender percentage breakdown was wrong. I fought the rising lurch in my tired legs to demand a recount of the census. Because how could this be? There were only 3 words on the panel, one of which was a preposition. The other was a label for a gender that almost half of the school identified as, and the other was politics. It was politics, right? Not women in painfully excruciating, humiliating events club or women who hate trees, monkeys, and chairs club. And so I asked the very few daring faces who came up to me on their own accord after amassing a total of 5 new signatures. With the price of my desperate cry for their dangerously real honesty, they hesitantly verified my growing fear. People are afraid of this P word most of all. It's been weeks where I had to sit down in that revelation. People navigate through their everyday lives with the notion that only the informed have the ability to discuss what is happening in spaces of power, the ability to research, read, and ask the necessary follow-up questions becomes an ability we cannot afford for ourselves. But why? I sat with the big why for a while, and the longer it festered, the more it became one of those "it's just the way the world works." Until October 7th happened, and my world went silent. When all of these dangerously real and scary P words came about on our phones and silently stirred in our guts, yet nobody could say a thing. It's polarization. It was the one P word that I hear incessantly, over and over and over again. It's the one word I could probably scream in the libraries, on the mountaintops, without being vilified because the rest of the world would look and nudge shoulders with me about. We're too polarized. It's the polarization in this country. And when we simplify complicated conflicts, wars, issues into a matter of polarization, we commend ourselves for having some part of recognizing its existence without putting in the work to propose solutions, demand change, or empathize. It's a word packed with emotion, one that has an edge to cut and split through communities of people while empowering the bystander to stand on a moral ground. But what was it really? What does it entail for our mouths to salivate when we easily use it and halt the use of others? Underneath that word is a weak spot. The real ugly part of being human and limited in our knowledge of the world and of others, and arguably more important for some, of ourselves. The vulnerability of being wrong. The vulnerability of what makes us mad. The vulnerability of not being liked. This is not a conclusion that tosses this issue to polarization. And in fact, I shame those who feed it to those polarization labeling lions who tear at the seams of pursuit demanding for justice. Unfortunately, cases that spring up from the fundamental wrongs of living in a world upholstered by white supremacy cannot just be simplified to a symptom of polarization. Unfortunately, we live in a world where contradictions exist. But it is also a world where there's a difference between what is wrong and what is fundamentally right. The more that this exists, we can cut off the silent hand that orders us to sit passively and that easily parades into spaces where change can begin here and now.